Look, guys, I'm really excited about this podcast, especially because of all the speakers that I saw in the Vistage system as a chair and a member. Abe Wagner was the most impactful on my life. So I know, Mike, you and I have had conversations in the past about the drama triangle. This is the man who introduced it to me. And then as he introduced it to me, explaining like a victim mentality versus a rescuer versus a villain in that narrative that we can kind of create for ourselves or we choose for ourselves, that's really kind of a falsehood. But when he did it, I turned to him. Now, we were at a retreat in Manhattan at Times Square, and Abe was our keynote speaker, and we had about 15 people in the audience. And myself, I was just mesmerized by the Cartman drama triangle. And I turned to him and I said, "Where the hell were you 15 years ago?" and Abe got the joke. Like, I was playing the victim about playing the victim. So it's like what I've learned from it is, where am I playing the victim now, and how do I become a reformed rescuer? But Abe, what I want you to do is give us a little bit of your background so the audience kind of knows, why they're listening and why we're having this conversation. And then what I want to do is I want to make sure that you and I spell out a conversation that you and I had almost 10 years ago. Because even though it's like, I think it's about 15 years ago that I saw you speak, I still remember it like it was yesterday. I wrote an article, Mike, that I published on social media, sent to Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker replied to my email and said, you're onto something here. And all I really did was outline what Abe taught me in a very short period of time. And then I sent it to Abe as kind of a thank you to see if it passed muster with his view. He called me and we had this awesome conversation about Trump and Hillary and all sorts of things. So I want to outline all of that so we can kind of understand this political ideology we're dealing with now from from like a natural state of mankind. So it's why we're so politically divided, that sort of thing. So Abe, give us a background on what got you to where you are here today.
Well, I was a kid who lived in a children's home from age 12 to 18 when my father died. And I started working at the Jewish Community Center part-time, and it ended up that I stayed there for 17 years. I got a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in social group work in those days. When I got my master's, I was qualified to be a psychotherapist in the state of Colorado, and I got an evening job. I had a wife and 3 kids. I got an evening job doing group therapy with parolees from the state prison and mental patients from the state hospital. That was an evening job. I did that for 10 years. But that led to a second career. I started a clinic with a psychiatrist that I'd started working with for the state of Colorado with these groups. And so we started a clinic together, and I started speaking on mental health, mostly at Catholic organizations because he was Catholic and very interested in this stuff. And one thing led to another. Young Presidents Organization, a very prestigious international organization, heard of me and invited me to Vienna, Austria to be one of their speakers with a lot of famous people. One of whom was in the audience was Dr. Ken Blanchard, in those days known for situational leadership, later on for the 1-Minute Manager, et cetera, et cetera. And he helped me get my first book published by Prentice Hall called The Transactional Manager. And then I published Say It Straight or You'll Show It Crooked. Anyway, I quit being a therapist a long time ago. And for the last 45 years, I've been working with YPO and the executive committee, now called Vistage. And that led to working for corporations all over the world. And I just have been on airplanes, et cetera. That's why I look so bad. I did 3.8 billion miles with United Airlines. I'm about 27 years old. Anyway, make a long story short, that's it. I retired about 3 years ago, still do some training by Zoom or that sort of thing with organizations. That's my background.
Well, I got to tell you, so picture, I want to say it was 10 years ago. So I basically wrote up a synopsis of the Cartman drama triangle, which you introduced me to. That, so what we'll do is we'll get the producers to put up what that looks like as a graphic in post-production.
Right.
So that people can kind of see what the villain, victim, rescuer triangle really is. If I understand it correctly, Cartman graduated Duke in 57. By 63, he invents the Cartman drama triangle and then changes interpersonal relationships. But I would argue what it really did for me was not only did it change my interpersonal relationships and turn me into a reformed rescuer. Like, so what I do is I use a line from Pulp Fiction. My name's Paul, and this is between y'all. Right. So so I don't get admired in other people's drama. It's like they don't realize they're actually creating it. So what it did was it helped me with an ethos of personal responsibility. I've created all the drama in my life. Every decision that I've made, I'm the sum total of every decision I've ever made. So what it does, that allows me to take back control in a situation where I don't play the victim to whatever the perpetrator is in my story. I now realize I created all of that. I'm the idiot that created all of that. Therefore, I'm the idiot who can fix it.
Let
So
me
then,
also say, just to jump in,
sure.
psychological games that we play. A game is a series of transactions, often repetitive, with a predictable outcome, hidden motives, and a payoff of bad feelings. They are played through the roles of the drama triangle. So when we're in a drama triangle, we are playing a game. Now, games are subconscious, and you were making it sound like you did these things consciously. Most games in definition are subconscious. We don't know we're doing them. We can learn later on that we're doing them or we'll catch ourselves, but we don't do them consciously. If we're consciously into something, it's a maneuver, not a game.
Well said. So, for me though, it's what I want to do is I don't want to let myself off the hook. I don't want to claim that this is, something that happened to me. What I'm trying to do is get
Good.
permanently on the right side of that. So this way I'm building better psychological habits, because this is what I believe, Abe, is that this goes back to my evolutionary psychology studies, that whatever enabled our ancestors to survive long enough to procreate continues in the next generation. So like what I can make an argument is if there's anything that's pernicious and persistent, there's some type of evolutionary benefit to it. I believe playing the victim enabled our ancestors to survive long enough to procreate. That's the reason why we see it everywhere once we become aware of it, especially in ourselves. So it's the thing that enables us to survive to adulthood, or at least let's say it encourages us to survive to adulthood, especially in our ancestral past. But now it's the very thing that stands in the way of my future success. So if whatever I'm trying to accomplish is worthy enough, it's worthy enough for me to get over my old self.
Absolutely.
So, and then how do I build better habits going forward so that I can create a better world? Like, I believe that every entrepreneur, maybe they don't know this consciously, but they're ultimately trying to leave the world a better place. That's what I want to do. And Abe, I had open heart surgery 2 years ago. It's almost my birthday now. I had open heart surgery on my birthday 2 years ago because I thought, what better gift to give myself than these guys extending my life for 30 years? So but what it did was it motivated me. Like, I don't know that I'm ever going to be buried, but if I am, I want my headstone to read, "He helped the few protect the many." So what do I have to get over next in order to make sure that that becomes a reality and I leave this world a better place?
I'm with
So,
you. I'm with
but
you.
I see your work is really helpful to that, especially the way you're able to deliver it in such like a concise, eloquent way, and even like a bit funny too.
Yes. And by the way, I have a list of ideas on how you stay out of games, which is what you're making reference to. And I'll review that at some point.
Well, I still think that the Cartman drama triangle is relevant today. I
Very,
don't
very.
I don't know that the Eric Burns book, The Games People Play, is as relevant as it was when it was written. Because if I understand it correctly, Cartman was Eric Burns' protege.
Yes.
And then, but when you outline the 6 ego states about, and what that did was that taught me what codependency is. And man, my first marriage just lit up all over that chart when you put those things up about how my ex-wife and we spoke to each other as the critical parent or the rebellious child. We were both those in that category. So we were a toxic mess from word go.
That's what happens with most real conflict, doesn't go well. We're both rebellious, or one's the critical parent, the other, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. Those are both critical parents.
Yeah.
Rebellious kid, I didn't do, it wasn't my fault. Well, it was my fault. I'm not going to do it. And we get into that stuff. And the ego states is a fabulous subject for another time because it would take our whole segment on that.
Well, maybe what we could do is have you back on if you're open to it, because
Oh,
I understand.
I'm open to it.
I understand that you're retired now. But the deal is that like there's a thing about when people have spent the majority of their lives concentrating in an avenue that's going to benefit humanity. It's how do we data mine that, so that this way what happens is we can teach it to people who are much younger than us, and this way they can have less grief. Like, I'll give you an example. There was a prevalent concept in the 70s, and really the second phase of feminism, that there was no difference between male and female brains, and that in the last 50 years there's so much cognitive evidence to disprove that. Even like machine learning can now tell the difference based on wave functions in the mind, studies of it, whether the brain is male or female. Like, that's how much of a difference there really is between us. So the effort had good intentions. It was like, our brains are the same, therefore we should be equal. Yet denying science isn't really an awesome way of supporting your argument, because it makes it too easy to dismantle that argument. But I would argue that I can't even count how many arguments that my ex-wife and I had over the fact that I was perceiving the world differently than she was, therefore I was evil or stupid.
Mm.
And the idea is, like, I think when we have proper expectations about the other, like, I actually considered wearing my other shirt today saying, being a New York Jet fan prepared me for COVID, right? Like, I have 50 years worth of evidence that they're not going to win anything, right? So what that does, it sets my expectations lower, maybe to zero, and then I'm less likely to be disappointed, and then my emotions are controlling me as opposed to the opposite, informing me.
I'm with you.
Yeah. So what I'd like you to do is, if you could walk us through, if I can remind you, what I did was I wrote an article based on what you taught me. I sent it to Steven Pinker, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and published it myself. And you were nice enough to call me, but it was specifically around how Trump uses the drama triangle and experiences each phase of it. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. You have the persecutor, rescuer, and victim. So you have a drama, you have a triangle. At the basis is a victim. If you don't have a victim, you don't have a psychological game. And games are seen as ending in negative feelings. So they're negative by and large. So it starts with a victim. No victim, no game. So with a victim, you also have a rescuer. And a rescuer in our terminology is what I do for you, what you're capable of doing for yourself. We have good intentions, but people are capable of doing it themselves and therefore become dependent upon you. And then you have the persecutor. And this starts in childhood. For example, little Tommy says to his mama, "Can I go outside and play?" She says, "Only after you finish your homework." Now, there's no big game yet, except that Tommy's going to get into a game. And Tommy feels like a victim already, and mother's the persecutor, won't let him go. So she goes to daddy, and he says to daddy, "Daddy, can I go play outside? I didn't finish my homework." "Oh, you'll do it later, son. Go ahead, you can go play." Now, mama sees him playing out there. Now, what the kid just set up was a game called Let's You and Him Fight. They do it subconsciously. So mom goes to dad and says, "Well, why is he outside?" "Because I told him it was okay." "Well, I told him it was not okay." Now here's the persecutor and the rescuer getting into it. If you ask mama, daddy's the persecutor now. If you ask daddy who's mama, mama's the persecutor. They both see each other as persecutors. Daddy feels like a victim because mama's mad at him. And little Tommy says, "I wonder why the two of them can't get along." And very often this happens in business. I say to I go over my boss's head. I see my boss as a persecutor, I'm the victim. My boss's boss is going to be my rescuer. He gets sucked in and goes and clobbers my boss. Now the rescuers become the persecutor. The persecutors become the victim. Now my boss comes to me and says, "Why'd you go over my head?" He sees me as the persecutor. He's the victim. We switch roles on the triangle. The reason it's called the drama triangle is the drama takes place when people switch roles on the triangle.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about what's happening in politics, I don't need to tell you that Trump has been the perennial victim. And the clever people in this world are the persecutors who'd like you to believe they're the victims. Like the guy that raped somebody and says that the police were too rough on him and sues the police. He's the victim. The police are the persecutors. Those are the clever people, and Trump does that regularity. The persecutor for him is Washington and anybody who disagrees with him.
Well said.
Now, all of the rescuers are the people that send him money, the people that work for him, the people that wouldn't normally do things that they're doing because they want to be seen as favorable in Trump's eyes. And all of those people who are the rescuers end up as victims. They go to jail. All the January 6 people that went to jail, it happens over and over repetitively. And Trump does not become their rescuer. He's going to help them pay their bills, and he doesn't help them. He throws them under the wheels of the bus if they disagree with him or don't do what he wants. And it's a classic drama triangle. Most of the people that work for him are playing kick me because eventually they're going to get kicked.
Wow.
They put themselves in a position to play kick me, and they do the roles to get there.
You know, I think there's even something in here about what Jonathan Haidt has taught us. So Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Righteous Mind. So in it, he outlined what he called the moral matrix, that conservatives have a wider moral matrix, meaning they trigger on 5 different categories. There might be a 6th if I'm remembering it correctly. In the case of liberals, they trigger on 2. So liberals don't on 2 of those, call it 5. So that means that liberals don't understand conservatives as well as conservatives understand liberals. So I had this conversation with my brother, who's very liberal. Most of my family is very liberal. I'm technically a liberal, but I'm an old school liberal. Like, I don't care who you sleep with or what you smoke. And I'm not arrogant enough to think that like your weed is any worse than my tequila. You know what I mean? I see them as synonymous. So, but I don't insist you have to think the way I do. So what most people don't understand, so picture like what my article was about was the difference between Hillary and Trump. That in Hillary's drama triangle, or Hillary's story, let's call it, she's the rescuer. So if we start it here, if I got it right, and you let me know what your thoughts are. So she's the rescuer, the villain is Trump, and the victim is the voter. Now they'll never call the voters victims, they just call them voters. So the idea is each one of them are creating a narrative that's a falsehood. In the case of Trump, Trump's the rescuer, Hillary's the villain, and the victim is the voter. So what I argue is that since I saw you speak, and this has been kind of, call it like a program running around in the back of my mind since then, because I felt so moved by what this is and saw the errors of my past. Like in my case, my mother used me as her therapist from the time I was 6 till the time I was 21.
So you were the rescuer, she was the victim.
Without a doubt. So, and she had this masterful way of triangulating everything. If she was upset with you, she would never tell you. She would tell one, and I'm the 7th of 7, so a large family. And my dad was a very distant man, always working or playing tennis or what have you. So the situation is that she was basically bad mouthing him because he was her villain, and she was the victim in the whole thing. A classic martyr situation until I was 21, and then realized this is like almost bordering on child abuse. That I'm not qualified to be a therapist. I'm not trained to do this, and you're bad mouthing my role model. So then what happened was I end up with a woman who gives no affection and no respect because it felt normal to me. So
the other explanation of that, by the way, that often in psychology, we marry people either like parents we got along with or parents we didn't get along with, in hopes that with the ones we didn't get along with, in hopes that we'll get what we didn't get from our mother, for example. But the problem is that the people we marry have the same problems as our mother, and they don't know how to give.
yeah.
And so you recreate the same problem.
Yep. So, but I think that the idea is combining let's call it situational awareness. Well, let me back up a second, because there's something I noticed in therapy, that the second that the patient starts to laugh at their own foolishness, they're actually on the right path to recovery. Like they're actually healing.
Awareness.
Yeah. So, but it's when they can laugh at themselves as opposed to take seriously whatever they consider the perpetrator in their world is. So, but back to Hillary and Trump, what the third part of that article was really about was that the press does the same thing. The press comes in as a rescuer, and the villain is whoever disagrees with their politics. and then the victim is always the reader. So I think what it is we're easily manipulated by people looking to gain power based on our natural state of mankind being victim mentality, because it enabled our ancestors to survive long enough to procreate.
And the interesting thing are the switches that happen. You know, the victim becomes the rescuer becomes the persecutor. And, you know, you can play games with two roles, like persecutor and rescuer, or all three. And
So
so, go ahead.
I actually wanted to jump in because my background, Mark has mentioned politics and the media, and that's exactly what my background is. So for 5 years, I was on television here in South Florida as the political analyst for 2 stations, and then I worked in government before that. But what's interesting is when you look at the triangle, you have what you were just saying. Trump is playing the victim. Washington is the persecutor. But he's played all these roles, I would say, incredibly effectively. And I'm not a supporter of President Trump, but when I was on television, I had to be very sober, very unbiased, and explain in 2 languages, English and Spanish, to viewers what different aspects of politics they should be aware of. History is going to remember Donald Trump 100 years from now, whether you love him, hate him, or indifferent, as one of the most impactful, whether you believe it's positive or negative, political figures in the modern American presidential system. Here's somebody who has now, this is his 16th year of being relevant in American politics, because we all thought back in 2012 and 2011 when he started questioning President Obama's birth citizenship. We all thought he was going to run then, and he almost did. But today, he is now on the verge of becoming the only major party presidential nominee to win his party's nomination in 3 consecutive cycles, 2016, 2020, and 2024. The last person to do that was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he was elected 4 times and died in office before we had presidential term limits. So Trump is going to be studied. I just feel it's for all the wrong reasons. To your point, yes, he's been the victim, and right now it's the New York District Attorney, it's the media, it's everyone, except you're the one that more than likely slept with a porn star, paid her off, falsified business records. But sure, you're the victim, and they're the persecutors, and you're asking for contributions. This morning, I received a note that he has received, I think, $34.5 million in contributions. And that's partially him posting on social media saying, I am a political prisoner, his words, not mine. And so he needs these folks to rescue him, and then he is going to rescue the country. But here's the part that I find disgustingly brilliant. He's going to rescue the country, which from my perspective and from, data, does not need his rescuing. But he's also turning to the persecutor role if he's elected. And he has said that. He has said, I am your revenge. I am this, this, and this. So my question to you as a world-renowned expert is Donald Trump a brilliant psychological animal that knows how to play all of these roles so effectively that it got him to be in the highest office in the land, and despite a defeat, he is on the verge. He has a 50% chance of becoming president again. Or is it just dumb luck? He said, I am this American success story. You should be like me. Not that he was persecuted.
Yeah, I suspect it's the latter. I suspect he had a lot of life experiences in his own family where he was rescued a lot, probably by his dad with money and in many other ways, and was seen as a loser many times, as I understand it.
Yeah.
So I think his life experience, it became a natural for him. And I wouldn't be surprised if he now has an understanding of things like the drama triangle. So I'd say it's probably a combination of both. And
That's what's so dangerous, I feel, and why we're going to look at our politics. I'll be long gone, all of us will, but in the 22nd century, I think they're going to look almost and I'm not equating him to Jesus Christ, but I am saying to a pre-Trump and post-Trump era, because we've already reformed our federal laws when it comes to elections. We reform with the Electoral College Reform Act, which was bipartisan. We already did that under Biden in his first 4-year term. But my concern is post-Trump, what are we going to? He only has 4 years if he wins or not. He cannot run again. But what are the reforms that we are going to have to implement? Because it seems like now, instead of this strong presidential figure that we had post 9/11, post World War II, and then there was this fading off, almost a prime ministerial role where presidents were deferential to Congress. I think we're going to have to go back to that after Trump, because it has tested the institutions of our country to a point where the Supreme Court has not had a lower approval rating and a higher level of distrust from the American electorate. And I understand I'm younger than you all, but in my lifetime, you can check this. This is validated in research. Our institutions are suffering. So I think that because of this psychological game that he has been playing, where he has 47% of the country that is going to be with him, or I should say of the voting public, because not everyone votes. But I think this psychological game he has almost mastered politically is going to result in the United States saying, post-Trump, we went to a system where the president had authority, but we actually diluted presidential authority and spread authority out through our institutions to avoid, you mentioned J6, or to avoid a lack of clarity in what the heck happens to a president if he's criminally convicted post office. I think it all came from this psychological game he played.
That's a very nice description. I don't know if you asked me a question, but if you didn't, I like what you said. I agree with that.
Yeah, I heard this recently. Probably the best analogy that I heard about Trump is he's a masterful 13-year-old bully. And I think it goes back to the drama triangle.
He's the rebellious kid.
But here's my question, because, and I apologize that we started this, and I am a city commissioner now. I have a meeting, so I won't be here beyond in the next 10 minutes. But I did want to get this in because it's critical. Is there a recovery period? Okay. And I ask that as not someone who's I didn't even watch The Apprentice. I could care less about this man until he became president. And I actually had to interact with him and his team when I was in government locally here, because he had business interests in the county. But is there a recovery period from the folks that are with him in which, I don't know which role they play, but they realize later on, like many January 6th participants have now, when it's, hey, I've been convicted, I'm in prison or served prison time. He didn't help me. He didn't fundraise for me. He didn't do anything. And he went off and ran another presidential campaign. Is there a period that the rest of them say, okay, let's look at this soberly?
Well, I think there'll be a percentage of people that will do that without question. And I heard the other, my wife said to me, is there going to be a big rebellion like the January 6th? And my own opinion was that people said, look at all those people in prison. I don't want to go to prison anymore. There'll be some people like that. There will be people to learn. But what he does, he has a value system very different than the American value system, what we believe in. And I think people have got to take a look at their basic values. That's what keeps us in the triangle. May I just give you a fast review of what I think they ought to be?
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Of course.
So, say it straight. Say it straight or you'll show it crooked. If you don't really verbalize and say where you're at with people, you show it in a variety of ways. For example, if I'm nervous here, I might not say that I'm nervous, but Susan, would you get me a little water, please? But there'll be something here that'll tell you I'm nervous. If you don't say it straight, you show it crooked. You ask me to do something and I really don't want to do it. Well, I'll show you I don't want to do it. I'll do it late. I'll do it wrong. I'll forget to do it. So if you don't, excuse me. I forgot to warm up my voice. Anyway, let me just read through. Understand your goals and direct your activity to accomplish these. Stuff like this will keep you out of the drama triangle and out of games. Treat yourself and others with dignity and respect. Each one of these could be a whole chapter, and they are in a book that I once wrote. Be self-determining and help others to be the same. That would stop rescuing. Be self-determining, help others to do the same. Be responsible for your own thinking, feeling, and behavior. That's the big one that you and I talk about, Mark. Taking ownership, something he never does. Live in the here and now. How many times have you argued with somebody about what you said or did the other day? You never can get there. Get into the here and now. Where am I now? I give you a simple example. When my youngest son was having difficulty, the psychiatrist, the therapist we sent him to, said, come in with your ex-wife, been divorced for 10 years. Come in with my ex-wife, and for the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes, she's mad at me for something that happened 10 years ago. And now, using this principle of living in the here and now, I said, I can't do anything about 10 years ago. What do you want from me now so that you quit being mad? She says, I'd like you to help me go through college and pay for some of this stuff. I said, I'd rather have you stay mad. The therapist fell out of his chair. Anyway, I then did help her. But that's what I mean by living in the here and now. Speak with a purpose of resolving issues rather than proving you're right. Because if you're proving you're right, somebody's got to be wrong. Zero-sum game.
Well said.
Continue what works and modify or discontinue what doesn't. People say, well, who doesn't do that? How many times have you argued about the same thing? How many times have you gotten into a game where you give advice and people are mad at you? Ask for what you want and invite others to do the same, if it makes sense to do so. One of the problems we have, let me just talk about over-adaptation, a concept from Jackie Schiff in Transactional Analysis, which is what we're talking about. Transactional analysis is the basis of the drama triangle and games, et cetera, et cetera. Ask for what you want. So I'm doing a seminar one time for 75 people in the coal mining business, talking about over-adaptation. That's where you modify your behavior based upon mind reading or assumption. So this guy says, I'm going to tell you about over-adaptation. I've been married to the same woman for 50 years. Now, my wife always made eggs hard in the morning, and I never liked them, but I didn't want to tell her because I thought it hurt her feelings. He's over-adapted. One day, he gets up and makes his own eggs. I get up, make my own eggs, I turn them over easy. My wife walks in and says, why you turn them over easy? He says, because that's the way I like them. She says, no, you don't. You like them hard. He said, where'd you ever get that idea? He said, well, when we went to your mama's house and we were dating, your mama made eggs hard. He said, my mama never knew how to make eggs. Now, that's an example of somebody not asking with someone he lives with for what he wants. Ask for what you want. You'll be surprised how frequently you'll get it. It's got to make sense, though. If I asked for everything I want, they'd be throwing me in jail. Make agreements that you're willing and intend to keep. That's another biggie. I make an agreement to do something, somebody else asks me to do something, and I then go do that in favor of what this guy asked. I'm in a game. So, I don't do that. Give, accept, and ask for positive strokes and constructive feedback. Most people will ask for you, tell me what's wrong with you. You ever ask somebody, what do you really like about me? What did you like about the job I did? We want to know what we did wrong all the time. Ask for what you want, but also give constructive feedback. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we could talk about there. Express your feelings appropriately, then you can get on with the tasks at hand. If I'm irritated about something, or I feel bad about something, and I don't say something to you about it, I'm going to show it likely in a crooked way. Last one, in a conflict, communicate only with those people who can help you resolve it. Communicate only with people who can help you resolve it. So I stop bad-mouthing people. If I go to you because if I get it out with you, you'll help me and I'll quit being mad, fine, that helped. If I need some advice, that helped. But to go and badmouth people and tell everybody else except the person that you're having the problem with, and learn to do it constructively, which we could talk about another time. These will keep you out of games in the drama triangle.
Abe, I know you're not publishing your book anymore, but I would imagine what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can find it used on Amazon.
Well,
And
I can get it published if there were enough interest. I don't want to be in the business of going and taking a book to the post office. That drives me nuts. You know what I mean? I mean, I
all right,
drive myself nuts. That doesn't drive me nuts.
all right. So what I'm going to ask Noah to do is to edit this part out. When we're done, we got to stay on this call for a little while longer. I'm going to teach you exactly how to do all that stuff. If you want my help, I'll help you.
Okay.
And the reason
Well,
why is because
I'm gonna have to sign off because I've got to run to the city. So I apologize, sir. It's that we have a ribbon cutting for a new business, and I just became a city commissioner, so I need to go there. But I do want to, if with your permission, if I could email you, because I've got some questions,
Sure.
because whether it's my private business or now my public service, my wife says I need to become a better psychologist to understand everything that's being thrown at me.
I'd be honored. You're quite a guy. I'd really
Thank
be
you
honored.
much. I'll get the email from Mark, and I apologize. I have to cut out.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Bye.
well, so Abe, there's a few other things I want to ask you about because of your background, your expertise, what have you. So, but I got to tell you that I think you're uniquely qualified to at least discuss this with me. Being a Vistage speaker for so long, that I've noticed that the arrogance in Vistage has changed. So 15 years ago, when I first started speaking for Vistage, one out of like maybe one meeting, I would get one angry male CEO yell at me. And this happened about once a month, like so one in every 8 meetings, yell at me. It's not like that. Those outbursts have gone the way of the dodo. Yet I'm seeing a different kind of arrogance. There is arrogance where people want me to make them right. And I'm being routinely asked to speak to the least reasonable person in the room. And then added to my presentation, a commitment to be unoffendable from everyone. So that this way I can teach them the truth, especially about things of the science of human nature. What I teach the Vistage members is how to predict the future more accurately and how that ties back to the extreme valuation of their business model. So I teach them about how the CIA utilizes hotbeds of they can spot demographically hotbeds of violence in the world, how we can extrapolate that out to predict hotbeds of economic growth. And then I walk them through just how boring their customers are, because human beings are ridiculously predictable. So what happens is at some point they metaphorically have slapped themselves in the forehead going, wow, how come I've never heard about this before? It's because it's boring. It doesn't sell advertising space. So the news isn't going to tell you about this. They keep you in the unpredictable world because that creates a cycle of addiction with them. I don't do that. I teach them how to predict the future more accurately, but I'm consistently getting a very strong pushback from people with certain strong political ideologies that they don't want to know truth. They say they do, but they don't. And they get angry when when you tell them that the lies, the beautiful lies that they're believing are lies. So there's like, maybe there's a smoother way I can introduce this or what have you. Or maybe what I do is just say, hey, statistically, 1.79% of my audiences absolutely hate my presentation. The 98 point some odd love it. Maybe I just shouldn't worry about the 1.79. But here's the weird part, Abe. It's the 1.79. It's only 0.1% male. It's 7% female. So, and that disturbs me that I have to even say that because it sounds sexist just for me saying it, but I can't deny the actual evidence. And I've got near empirical research. I've done 850 presentations for Vistage so far. It's just a troubling trend for me. And I don't know why that is, or maybe it's something that I'm saying or something like that. When you were a speaker for Vistage, did you get that arrogant pushback on you? And what did it look like?
I didn't necessarily feel it was arrogant, but sometimes it was. First of all, when people will disagree with you, it's a sign that they trust you.
Oh,
Is that 100% true? No, but it's very true most of the time. When your kids can get mad at mom or your daddy, it means they trust them. They know nothing bad will happen to them. When you can disagree with your boss, you know you're not going to get fired. It's that sort of thing. And that, just start with that. That's good that people can disagree with you. This is old wisdom, but I like it a lot. When people disagree with you, the first thing you want to do is see it from their point of view. In neuro-linguistics, they say, get into their map of the world. If you can get into their map of the world, see it from their point of view. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It means things like, well, I understand why you feel bad about that. Let me ask you a question. What conclusion did you draw? Do things to say, when I really listen to you, my message to you is you're important. When I don't listen, my psychological message, or they receive this message often, is you're not important. So to begin with, if you're really understanding, you don't have to agree with them. Your half of the battle is over. Then you present, and the second thing you do is they found in neurolinguistics that from the time we're little kids, we learn to imitate. That's how we learn. We walk like they do, we talk like they do, we do a variety of things. When you are in sync with somebody and you have good rapport, you naturally imitate things about them. You might breathe like them. The more you are like the person you're dealing with, the better your chance of success. Only you don't want to be like them in negative ways. So if somebody says to me, you always want your own way, I match their energy, not their tone of voice. I can understand that you're upset. If I said I can understand that you're upset, they'd think I don't understand. Match their energy, not their tone. Or I might sit like they do, or breathe like and that helps me to establish rapport. Once I have rapport, then I present my point of view. And the way I know I have rapport is that they're following me or they're listening now to me. So the first part is really tune into them and think of it as, you know something, the guy trusts me a little bit enough to speak up, even if I don't like the way they do it. They do it from critical parent or rebellious child. I don't like that, but I can still use the same technique that's very useful. And then
That's masterful. I love that.
Okay.
The other thing I've noticed too is geographically, I've noticed that what I'm calling arrogance, like Boston is certainly the worst place on planet Earth to speak, like a very angry, arrogant type tone. So what I'll do to the chairs is I'll call them a month in advance and say, convince me to come. Convince me I'm not walking into a firing squad.
Oh, that's good.
Well, so yeah, most people don't shy away from some of my colorful language, but in the Northeast, so I was a chair in New York, so which is one of the harshest environments to actually be a chair in. So we used to call it a no asshole policy. So if the member didn't know that they're not the CEO when the Vistage meeting is going on, they had to go, right? Or if they said they insisted that they were the smartest person in the room and weren't open and didn't have a growth mentality, they were asked to leave. Because to me, it's a cancer in a Vistage group. Because what you're really looking for is viewpoint diversity. And the supposition is, well, if you get diversity of skin color and maybe gender, you'll get viewpoint diversity. I'm not so sure that really holds true. I think it's there's a downside to DEI, and that's you're assuming you're going to get diversity because of optics when you actually get homogeneity of opinion, because you might be trying to shoehorn that into everywhere. So, but what I found is that Boston was the worst. Slowly but surely, San Francisco has taken over. And I think it's because you and I were in a high accountability world. You know, when you're sitting down talking to CEOs on a regular basis, they don't suffer fools lightly. You got to know your stuff. You got to be able to back it up with evidence. You got to be able to deluge them with all sorts of sources that are not in the room. You got to overwhelm them with it. Yet in San Fran, it's like they've almost, it's like, it's not the majority of people. 80% are great. It's the 20% who have convinced themselves that they can, through technology, somehow morph the world into what they want it to be. So it's in anthropology, they call it cultural anthropology as opposed to biological anthropology. And I teach from the in effect, biologicizing the future. So this way, if whatever we're trying to analyze becomes more accurate because we can't violate the laws of biology. We just can't, it's based in reality. However, it doesn't jive with everybody's perspective on the world. They want to think, no, we can supersede that. We've outgrown that. We're, godlike in our ability to control our environments now. And through technology, we can manipulate that. At least that's my assumption about it, because I find it quite frustrating to deal with San Francisco and its ilk, that there's this larger portion of a minority than any other city that is convinced, no, I can change that. And they don't, I find that they don't listen from listen from student, they listen from judge, if that makes sense to you. Like, I don't know if that's one of the games that you're used to hearing, but I've noticed that, and it's frustrating.
You know, my own experience was I spoke in Boston several times, in San Francisco more times than I can count. I didn't experience them the same way. And of course, I don't have the same outlook and knowledge that you have about nurture versus nature. I've always felt like it was more nurture. And now I understand it's clearly a combination as far as I'm concerned. So
Yeah.
even though we have the heredity, we can certainly change that. So I tend to look at things that, can we change it completely? I don't know. We don't need to. And by the way, I don't change people. I invite them to change, and sometimes they take the invitation and sometimes they don't.
Well, I think if we came from, like, let's say we were let's say masters at martial arts. I think your form of martial arts in communication is very different than mine. Mine's in your face, confrontational, take you out to the woodshed, slap you around out of love. Because I talked 2 CEOs out of suicide in the financial crisis.
Wow.
And that was and I have no background in that. My chair training didn't teach me how to do it. And frankly, Abe, that sucked. I don't ever want to go through that again. So my point back to the CEOs is, look, you're pointing the energies of your company in the right direction. We're cool. We're not cool. So, and because it comes down to this, through commerce, we are capable of what religion hopes to accomplish and politicians fail at. That's taking care of large scale communities. In your case, this would just be my assessment, not that I've ever studied martial arts, but from little I know about it, yours is more of a Tai Chi methodology that I must say I really do respect. That it's you've learned over the years about how to, like, take what people are giving them and use their energy back to them to help them.
Flow with it. That's
Yeah.
getting into their map of the world. Flow with their energy, and once you feel you have rapport, then come back with your own energy.
Awesome.
So I think it does fit the martial arts. What most people do is they go like this, I go like that. They go like this, and that's what Congress has done forever, the Republicans and the Democrats.
Yeah.
It's your fault. No, it's your fault. You don't understand. You don't understand. You don't understand. Well, tell me about that. How come you think I don't understand? All right, so let me see if I got your point. Well, I can see from your perspective, I'm saying I care, you're important. I'm flowing with their energy. When you don't do that, the person feels a sense of rejection and responds in kind very often.
Yeah, so picture, I think this kind of leads me into probably the most important point from my perspective, is I see society as committing suicide. I think what happens is that in evolutionary theory, there's a concept called displaced religiosity. The argument is every human being is religious. We're born religious. This goes back to Blaise Pascal with 400 years ago, trying to prove that God exists through math, talking about how every human being has a God-shaped hole in his or her heart. So through an evolutionary lens, it's because it enabled our ancestors to survive long enough to procreate. And the stronger the religion, the more that tribe thrived in its environment and was more likely to procreate, more likely to outcompete its competitors. And outcompete from an evolutionary perspective is out-reproduce, out-produce, assimilate, or eliminate the other tribe. Like I'm as of last night, I'm 1,027 pages into the Bible. So the Old Testament is just riddled with tribalism and the fact that the monotheism was a better form of religion than polytheism. So and arguably the polytheistic gods we could probably push them into a category of, they were like bad luck, the fates. So they make sacrifices to their gods to say, like, don't mess with my crops, leave me alone, kind of a thing. Well, that's not something you're going to lay down your life for, because there's no utopia in the afterlife. Monotheism, specifically Judeo-Christian thought, is all about how heaven is in the afterlife. And if you were able to enroll a cohort of young, mostly males, to lay down their life in protection of and provision of that tribe would outcompete the other tribe. So therefore, we are all religious. And as Western democracy has gotten less and less religious or more secular, that natural religiousness has to spill someplace. So the argument is it's spilling into the political sphere where we're creating a new religion of national politics, where we're sacralizing our political beliefs, and now all compromise becomes a sin. So what I see your work helping me in this effort to minimize the negative effects of that is because we're becoming a political animal that views the other side as evil. See, what's so brilliant about Judeo-Christian thought, and I would argue Judeo thought, is that it recognized the battle for good and evil happens internally inside all of us. The new religions or cults lack that wisdom, and they pit the battle for good and evil between people, between parties. I get in trouble for saying what I'm about to say, but it's the reason why I see no difference between AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene. I see them as two halves of the same stupid coin because they're prosecuting a false religious agenda politically and not know it. And who's more dangerous, the person who is full of crap and knows it, or the person who's full of crap and doesn't know it? I mean, Hitler thought he was the good guy. Stalin thought he was the good guy. Mao thought he was the good guy, when in fact, the three of them killed as many people as smallpox and malaria did over 57 years in the 20th century. So it's how do we minimize all of that? That goes back to a PhD named Isaiah Berlin. He studied the atrocities of the 20th century, but not from the backside of it. Like the danger to me of watching Schindler's List is we tend to think we'd be Schindler, not recognizing the natural state of mankind is to commit genocide. It was, so ubiquitous historically. It was basically war up until about 1959. So it's how do we minimize that psychology of our tendency to play our side versus that side? I see your work as helpful in that.
Yes, yes. It's by the way, we call it my work. It's most of other people's work that I modify myself. I wish I came up with so many of those concepts. I want to say to you, because you're talking about the religion, I'm an atheist, thank God.
Well, so am I. I love that line. I might steal that for a title of my next book.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm reading the Bible right now, and then as soon as I'm done with it, I'm going to read the Quran, is I'm trying to find ancient wisdom, and I want to build an argument for an atheist defense of religion, so that this way we can see what are the practical benefits of it instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. How can we sit back and say, all right, what's good for society? And I think I can make some very strong defensible arguments about how we're likely to get a new religious revival, because monotheism is really good at quelling that natural tendency for genocide in us. So our tendency to see evil in the other or stupidity in the other. And it's how do we get that communication back? I think the Cartman drama triangle is a linchpin in that. And then
how to stay out of it, and
yeah,
how to be straight with people instead of getting into games is another way of saying it. And I agree with you 100% that we need to get away from "I'm okay, you're not." It's
well
"I'm
all
okay,
said.
you're okay. I'm okay, you're okay."
Yeah, and but it wasn't that long ago. So I think what happens is when you get a Gutenberg event like social media, it brings out the worst in human beings. I mean, most people don't know this, but when Gutenberg invented the printing press, yes, it set us on a path for a hockey stick of curing illiteracy. Like, I don't know if you know this, but we're on the verge of curing illiteracy worldwide in the next 25 years. The majority of all people illiterate are in third world countries, and they're over 65 years old. So they're either going to learn to read or die. So in the next 25 years or so. So what happens is that means that scourge against humanity is going to be eliminated, partially because of the work of Johannes Gutenberg 400 years ago. Here's the part most people don't know. In the subsequent 100 years, Gutenberg's invention created 100 straight years of wars. So I'm thinking, like, before you were able to jump on with the technology. Mike and I were discussing this, not that we recorded it, but we were talking. He said to me, I don't think we're past the peak of this. I'm okay, you're not. He's estimating it'll be a decade. I'm hoping that it will be. History doesn't agree with that, but it might be because of the technology and things happen faster now. We might be able to move the needle. What I want to do, though, is for my audience, my CEOs, anyone who's picking us up on YouTube, I want them to get there faster, because I see what we're doing right now is kind of a terrible game we're playing that ends historically really poorly. So, I want to thank you for being on the show. I think your work is really helpful this way. I'd
Thank
like
you.
to have you back. In fact,
Absolutely.
you're the only guest so far I've asked to come back. So I want to hear more about the games people play and maybe the 6 ego states on the next one, if that's okay with you.
Sure, that's fine with me. Let me just say to you that people can learn more about transactional analysis through the North American Transactional Analysis Association,
Right.
NATAA, North American, and more about NLP, for example, getting in touch with NLP Comprehensive,
Yeah.
another organization that does it. I'll be happy to come back and be on your show. I like what you have to say and how you say it.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. And I appreciate your time. What I think is that what we're going to do is we're going to send out a copy of this podcast to every single CEO we have in all our social media, because I believe it's like, I believe so much in what you taught me those years ago. I wrote it into all 3 of my books so far. And maybe I'm going to do one book just on it.